The U.S. unwavering support for Israel in the nearly 3-month war in Gaza has drawn the ire of Muslim groups sympathetic to the overwhelmingly underdog civilian Palestinians in Gaza. Houthi rebels holed up in Yemen have stepped up their attacks against U.S. soldiers in their stations and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb tells us more.
Since mid-October, U.S. forces have been targeted about 100 times across 10 different locations in Iraq and Syria.
There have been more attacks in the past month than over a year's time frame during the time I was in Iraq and Syria as spokesman for the global coalition between August 2019 and September 2020.
That was a volatile time, too, when a spate of Iranian-backed attacks led the U.S. to take out Iran's elite Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani in a January 2020 airstrike. The military said his death was to prevent future attacks against the U.S. that were already in the planning stages.
That was serious, that was intense, but now we are seeing even more deadly, more threatening, more menacing, and more provocative actions from the Iranian-backed militias who are clearly trying to kill U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria.
The U.S. has responded to these attacks with about a half dozen retaliatory strikes, like this one against a training facility used by Iran's military in Syria. And they recently resumed counter-Islamic State patrols that had been put on hold since the onslaught of the attacks began. But analysts say the United States needs to do more to hold these Iranian proxy groups accountable for their attacks.
We can't expect these attacks to be the norm because eventually they'll be very successful. Eventually there will be U.S. casualties.
Retired Navy Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, or FDD, says the administration has focused to a fault on preventing the expansion of the war between Israel and Gaza across the Middle East.
The problem they have is they're not deterring the threat against U.S. forces. And so if those U.S. forces experience a significant attack with deaths, the United States is then going to be forced into a very heavy response. That heavy response will, in fact, cause the escalation they're worried about.
As Iranian-backed proxies have attacked American forces on land, Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen have launched missiles towards U.S. military and commercial vessels at sea.
Those will eventually lead to deaths at sea, to restrictions on shipping, increased insurance and shipping rates, and impact on the global economy.
The U.S. military says it is now working with an international coalition to respond to the maritime attacks, but it refuses to telegraph what that response might look like. Reporting at the Pentagon, I'm Carla Babb, VOA News.